Welcome back, everyone.
Hey. I don't know which table to sit on. This one or this one?
All right, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get started with our next session. So our next session is called Indigenous Communities Now and Future. And we have a panel of tribal leaders here. I'll introduce them here in a moment. And Sand Creek Massacre descendants. So they're going to be speaking with you about the impacts of displacement on their respective communities and Indigenous communities at large, and actions that communities are taking to address harm and to protect the future of next generations. So it's an honor for me to introduce our panelists. I would first like to introduce Conrad Fisher from the Northern Cheyenne Nation. Conrad is a tribal representative for the Sand Creek Massacre project, has served as vice president, interim president, and general counsel for the Northern Cheyenne tribe, has served as director of the tribe's Tribal Historic Preservation Office and dean of cultural affairs for Chief Dull Knife College, in addition to teaching Native American studies classes and Cheyenne language preservation classes. We are also joined by Ben Ridgely, Northern Arapaho Nation. And Ben is also a tribal representative for the Sand Creek Massacre project, has worked as a tribal and federal consultant for about 16 years, and was chairman and co-chairman of the tribe from 98 to 2022. And we're also joined by Ryan Ortiz. Ryan is also with the Northern Arapaho Nation and is a tribal representative for the Sand Creek project. Ryan is currently CEO of Arapaho First, which is a tribal holding company for a lot of its for-profit business. Ryan has an MBA in accounting and is also the first non-governmental employee to obtain the Certified Indian Fiduciary Trust Specialist certificate from the Department of Interior. So with that, it's a pleasure for me to present our panelists, and I will turn it over to Conrad to get us started.
Thank you, Kimberly. Appreciate it. Na nada ase habo shke se tsua se no man se was bewa de duchem het de bewa ze honas wo stan. Das da wenn ma hin hier das ma his tamat bewa de tis tavis. Nada ne chke hier koma sinde inano. I just wanted to share a little bit about my Northern Cheyenne language to everybody. I think as minorities, we come from beautiful backgrounds, whether you're Native, Hispanic, or other. I certainly enjoyed the last few hours today listening to displacement, cultural displacement of populations here in America. Certainly, I can relate to some of the dialogue and discourse that happened here in the greater Denver area. It reminds me of a time where the Northern Cheyenne Arapaho, the Cheyenne Arapaho made this their home here in the greater Denver area. And as a consequence of many different factors were displaced, and subsequently the horrific effect or the horrific event over at Sand Creek Massacre. But on a broader scale, I think when we talk about displacement, dislocation, forced displacement, the tribes of Native North America have a wealth of experience in being displaced, being a displaced people. And certainly massacres are a very familiar thing with many tribes. for the Cheyenne people, we've had a history of conflict with the U.S. government. And I just want to preface this so that you can gauge what displacement to Northern Cheyenne people is at this time. So we were displaced here from Colorado, and some of the Cheyenne were moved into Oklahoma, as called Indian Territory. Trail of Tears, the Cherokee, were also forcibly removed from their homeland and placed there. So were other tribes, including, of course, our relatives, the Southern Arapaho. And for the Northern Cheyenne, for some of us that were in the Dakota, Montana, Wyoming area, we were forced to go down to Oklahoma. But against all odds, we moved back to Montana at the displeasure of the government. The government tried to keep us down there, but we one of the few indigenous populations that were displaced but fought their way back to their homelands, their original homelands. So a lot of conflict, with the U.S. government. Once we were there, as with many different tribes, they were placed on reservations. Their territories included multiple states, their ancestral lands. However, by 1884, we had a reservation land base of less than half a million acres that we called home in southeastern Montana. So that was the first displacement that we had as Native people. Some of the problems that we face when it comes to housing, I know there's been a lot of talk about housing. And I hope I'm not talking too fast at this stage. For some that this is being translated, I understand. And so hopefully I'm not talking too fast. We face many obstacles as Native Americans, including what I've just talked about, being forced to live in a certain area, assimilation policies to erase the indigenous populations of Native North America. We face termination. So we've had all these pressures against us in our histories, very similar with other tribal groups. And so in Native North America, here in the States, you'll see many different reservations. If you picture all of America being all Native American, and then all of a sudden you just see little spots on the map of tribes, that is a combination of many things through federal Indian policy. Today, Northern Cheyenne in southeastern Montana faces multiple problems, including a lack of economy. We do have many different employers, biggest ones being the local tribal college, our tribal headquarters, are the major employees or employers, including the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Indian Health Service, but the entrepreneurship is lacking. And so there's a high unemployment because there's not a whole lot of employment there. And to make matters worse, the housing authority hasn't built many houses on the reservation. So you see multiple families in one house, similar to what I heard when the prices of the rent goes up here in Denver, but it's because of the lack of housing and the lack of employment that finds many reservations with 70% unemployment. So what happens is those people that seek employment, that want to be employed move off the reservation, I understand there's at least 60 to 70% of a reservation, the tribal membership that have gone off into the urban areas to seek employment. So when that happens, we fall into a similar situation that has been talked about today. We have to, we find ourselves in neighborhoods where minorities are minority neighborhoods. And so we find that gentrification in that area as well. One thing I do know in Montana, certainly in Billings, where a similar situation occurred, but in this case, there was a neighborhood where, or at least one block area where minorities, primarily Indians, were living, but there was a lot of drugs and alcohol that was occurring, and that was the basis for eliminating that area, the little neighborhood there, because what happened was that the drugs and alcohol had permeated other businesses in the form of theft and vandalism and that sort of thing. So I think there's many different angles that we can look at this, and that's just a isolated example of where drugs and alcohol were rampant in that one block area. But certainly, I think for Native Americans, the history of displacement is very profound in Indian country. And then you placed in a reservation compounds many other problems. So when you go off the reservation to a community, some Northern Cheyennes are here in Denver, but you face the same problems. You face prejudice, stereotyping, profiling, all those things that occur with minority, those that have those minority genetics traits, if you will. So I wanted to share just a little bit, but it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of good things going on in Indian country as well. Tribes or there's many tribes that have done well economically. There's tribal people that have found success, and I know that in many tribes they've founded their own tribal colleges. There's a lot of people that are in leadership positions, not just in their local counties and reservations, but also at the state and national level that have found success. So a lot of tribes that are economically well off have developed strategies for addressing unemployment and other issues on the reservation, and having partnerships off the reservation. And so that's good. We're starting to see that happen. But when I talk about the idea of displacement, I think I'm looking at a broader picture of that, and not just within certain neighborhoods here. So if you look at the history of Native Americans, it goes, I think, as minorities, whether you're Hispanic, Asian, there's a history in this country of being displaced, being gentrified and being assimilated. For Native Americans, that's always been an issue. When somebody says termination, relocation, that's in essence trying to erase the memory of what this nation has done to minorities, and in this case, Native Americans. So, and I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions at the end, and I'll quit at that point, and I'll hand it over to Ben. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Conrad. I just wanted to mention, Conrad covered a lot of the, understandings from, our tribe too. We face the same, problems being displaced. But it's always good. I just wanted to, let you know that we, are proud people. We have hard times, but we, are more blended in and bonded together because of our large families. We have a support system out there. And that's one good thing our Native people are to one another because of the displacement, the economic hardships that we face. And when we were here in history, this was the land here, and when they removed us after the massacre there, we migrated to Wyoming. And during that time period, when the other tribes found out that we were massacred, our Sioux allies, they came and retaliated for us, along with the Cheyenne and Arapaho. We were all alliance tribes. And we had skirmishes, settlers coming in, gold miners. And there were a lot of it was retaliation from our people that were really brutally massacred at that time. Caused a lot of Colorado wars, Indian wars, a battle of Julesburg, and then it even came into Wyoming. We had the Fetterman Massacre, the Red Butte Massacre in Casper, Wyoming. And still today, those bodies of those soldiers have never been recovered. There's a mass grave down there in Casper that archaeologists have been looking since the 20s, trying to locate these soldiers. And at that time, our allies were together, a large amount of them, still retaliating. But sooner after that, our Arapaho band from Wyoming wanted to go ahead and make peace because they were looking for the betterment of the future for our people, because we had no place to roam and go, you know. So with that, you know, the government, we try to stop all of the little major wars and try to make peace. But then, you know, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, we were there. We didn't have very much tribal people there, but through our oral histories, you know, they were there. And in the meantime, we tried real hard with the federal government at the time to try to get a good place to stay. They offered us a lot of places in Wyoming, probably about 5 different areas, because we were displaced from here and put in different areas that they promised us. But it never happened. And it's a good thing that at that time period, we had a translator that was educated from back east. His name was Friday. And he was good with the government because he was able to interpret their language and had a high context of the meanings of some of the wording that was done on these agreements and treaties. So we utilized that part, and we were notoriously enemies with the Eastern Shoshone at the time. Well, there were a big band of Shoshone, And they had a famous chief. Name was Washington. And he became friends with Friday. And when we were very starting to go under survival problems, then they let us come to their reservation. And through government intent at that time, they knew we were enemies. They figured somewhere down the line where we're gonna massacre or where we're gonna pick each one of our people and slowly kill each other off, but it didn't happen that way. Instead, you know, they gave us the eastern side of the reservation, which they owned, and they had the western side towards the mountains. And their reservation at that time was 44 million acres. Again, through their Fort Bridger Treaty that they signed in Wyoming, they reduced that to 2 million acres. And that's what it stands at today. So they lost a lot of leverage in their land, covered a few states. And that's what happened to other tribes besides us. And then we came along, and today we have a structured government. The only thing unique about that is we're the only tribe in the United States that had to pay for our reservation. We paid for it twice. And we were still promised by treaty law that they still owe us a reservation there in Wyoming. So that's still on the record. But we went ahead and moved where we're at right now. And since we were together, all the land, water, air, all those joint resources, we share them. And that's another displacement that really lacks our people's progress, because we want to do a major project. Both tribes have to concur on the usage of land. And that's what happened in the past. One tribe didn't want business and the other one didn't. So it was really, we lost a lot of revenue at that time period. An example, when I said the east and the west, they had an imaginary line once oil and gas were being discovered. And the Shoshone tribe, they told us, well, you guys stay on the eastern side of the reservation. We'll do my imaginary line, and we'll do the western part. And that really, that's the way they kind of identified each other. But then when the exploration came about, mostly all the land, the oil and gas were found on our side of the reservation. And that diminished the imaginary line, because we were the ones that were going to get all of the income. But again, it was going to have to be split 50-50. In today's society, we have about 11,000 tribal members. And the Shoshone tribe's probably around 5,000, and we double their population. And it took a lot of time for us to understand self-determination, because the Bureau ran our reservation for us, did our transactions for us, our daily business. But then when the law came about in the mid-70s, the Education and Self-Determination Act, then it allowed us to go ahead and use our sovereign rights to take our programs and utilize them, such as housing and WIC, tribal health. All those we were able to use those through our self-determination understandings. And that's what we did. And that didn't happen until about the mid-90s. First of all, we had to split the housing. And we had to go to court with our neighbors. They sued us because we split. But we end up winning that case. And that's what opened our self-determination contract. And then we were able to use our population and quit using the 50-50 formula, because 50-50, they were getting half of what we were getting, and still we had almost half, double their tribal members. So that was being unfair at that time. But then we did them a lot of favors at the same time. They got better amount like we did, even though they had less people. So in the long run, we help each other out. And this what kind of displacements caused a lot of hardships for us. So we took a lot of incentive in the mid-90s to do that. Like Conrad said, we have economic problems sometimes. We had to seek more economic development. And we had the laws there, the sovereign laws. And one big economic venture was we wanted to go into gaming since it was allowable by federal policy. So we did. And the state, under state law, all we were allowed to do was parimutuel and bingo. And they didn't believe that we had sovereign rights. So we had our bingo going, and we decided to go for Gaming 3, they call it, Las Vegas style gaming. So we met with the state, the governor right away said, no, we don't want gaming in our state of Wyoming. You guys can't have it. So what we did, we complied with our national gaming from Minnesota. They came and studied our reservation, our economics, our communities, and gave us a checklist of all what we needed to do to comply with Gaming 3. Took us a year. So we did a task force and completed that. And when it came to that, then we went to the state again and asked them. We completed all what we needed to do to have a Gaming 3. And again, they shut us down. They said, no, we're gonna form a task force and meet with you. So we did that, but they were just stalling us. Another year went by. So finally, after that year, they told us no. Week later, we filed suit on them. We went to Cheyenne. The Shoshones didn't want to, had nothing to do with it because we wanted our own compact. We were trying to have a double compact. Right away, the judge kind of knew about our federal policies, and he got a mediator from Colorado there, Boulder. 1 year later, the decision was made that they allowed us to have Gaming 3. But again, the state tried to stop it. So we came to Denver Circuit Court, filed suit on them, and we won here in Denver. Now we have a Class 3 in Wyoming, and our compact goes directly with the interior in the state of Wyoming. Don't get any income from our casino. So we're the only tribe in the nation that don't pay the state any money. So things like that, using our sovereign rights, kind of helped us in this displacement. So we got a lot more ventures that we have to look at, study, innovations to help our people. And Ryan here, he's going to be coming up next. And that's why we have a business called Arapaho First now, because we're trying to develop our own businesses. self-sustain our businesses to help our people with prices of propane and whatever we can do to cut costs for our people because we lack per capita in each tribe when it comes to sharing distribution through the national level. All tribes have to compete. It's a big pie, but all tribes have to get a share out of it, and it's not very much. Sometimes 20 to 23% of what out of 100%. So that's a big loss there. We have to come up with the rest through grants, our economics to meet some of those needs, and like I mentioned, our poverty, unemployment rate, 65%, 70%. It goes down during seasonal, but then it goes back up. So all those was caused from the displacement. In reality, today, our tribal leaders now were more wiser using these understandings and our sovereign rights to try to come up a little bit more, but still a challenge for us because we don't have that much support yet from our guarantees of our banks. We have to build more and more trust and still sustain our sovereignty. We don't want to give up anything when we sign a loan or do a business. We got to protect ourselves. So we're coming into your livelihoods of the real world. It's pretty hard, but it's going to take time, and education is what's going to help us out. But again, it goes back to our scholarships we lack. We're only allowed so much money to give to our graduates that are coming aboard, and that frustrates them. They quit, turn into alcohol, drugs, and they don't have the adequate housing. They can't get a loan. So we got a lot of understandings that we have to face. So that's for the betterment of our future. So today we're talking real. I'm glad we're talking real to you people because a lot of you guys earned your education, you earned who you are today. But we're still trying to do that for our people. It's going to take time, our efforts, because in the past, they tried to annihilate us, but we're still here today because of our culture, our ceremonies. We're always going to be here. Both tribes were here, and our Arapaho tribe, our elders used to always say, this is always the home. Our mountain, our water, our medicines are still in these mountains. So that's our protection there to keep us as identity for who we are today, you know. I know a lot of our tribal people move to cities and they have to struggle because sometimes they don't have the education to survive. But with that, you know, we are trying to build every phase of understanding to better our people. So what Conrad said, and it's real, and what we are saying, we duplicate a lot of these needs, but we're going to continue to be strong because we have always been superhuman, and we will still continue to be proud who we are with our ceremonies, our tradition, our language and culture, and try to make a better tomorrow for our young people and the future of our tribes, even though it's going to take time. So with that, you know, I'd like to say that that's the real meaning to this displacement. It causes more and more hurt for us, but we still learn a lot, especially when we have to get out there and practice and use our sovereign rights. So I'd like to say thank you, and I'll turn it over next to Ryan, so he'll continue on with his understandings and a lot of the economics here.
Thank you, Ben and Conrad. I think you got a good overview of, the displacement of the Arapaho and Cheyenne people as it pertains to being forcibly removed from Colorado. But I'm gonna try to help you guys visualize what that is, because you've talked about, or maybe you're more familiar about this campus and the displacement of the people who lived here in the area, and the magnitude that of the land that they were displaced from. But I'll give you a quick try to help you visualize what the tribes were displaced from. So in 1851, there was a Treaty of Fort Laramie, and that's where all these tribes came together. They all came together, and the government said, okay, this is Indian territory, was so wide all the way out to the west coast, and we're going to divvy up all this land to the tribes here, and every tribe leader agreed to that. And the Arapahos and Cheyenne's land, if you start here and you think of this as Wyoming, you come all the way down the Front Range through Colorado, you swing down, to the Arkansas River, to the bottom of Colorado, into Kansas, back up into Kansas and Nebraska, and into the top of Wyoming. And that was the Cheyenne and Arapaho's land that was given to them in the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie. When you think about that, if you guys are driving from right here to Wyoming, where we come from, we have to drive from Denver up to Cheyenne, and you look all the way up I-25. Think of all of the businesses, the oil and gas, and everything that is there now, that was essentially taken from the tribes and with no compensation. These tribes were given this area, and you think about all of that, billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of infrastructure that's there, never given one penny of compensation for that. They relegated after that 10 years later to a little tiny piece of land down in southeast Colorado, where the massacre ultimately happened, Sand Creek Massacre. From there, you're displaced in all of the different areas that you hear. The Northern Cheyennes up in Montana, the Southern Cheyennes and Arapahos who confederated into one government down in Oklahoma, and us, the Northern Arapahos, up in Wyoming, and as Ben said, put on a reservation with our historic enemies. The best way to equate that relationship is to equate it to a Democrat and Republican having a conversation and trying to progress, economic opportunities with those differences of opinions, historic differences of opinions. So you never, or you really struggle in those areas to progress your economic opportunities. So we come back to what this segment is called is the Indigenous Communities Now and the Future. And to give you that little bit of perspective of what the tribes never received a compensation for, based equivalent to what you see now, the billions and billions of dollars, what we struggle with back on these reservations, not only economically and housing and business opportunities, then we're criticized or ridiculed for trying to expand your economic opportunities, or your casinos, or you're criticized for trying to open up a casino. But see, it goes much further than just trying to open up a casino. We on Northern Arapaho, we're not able to tax. So you have no tax base. And how does the government and everybody work here? They tax people. We all pay taxes. That's how this infrastructure is built. That's how these roads are maintained. That's how the sewer systems and the water, you get clean water. You pay taxes and you get that. So when they mandate congressionally that you cannot create a tax, you cannot create a tax base where you live, what do they expect? They expect that you're going to rely on them, which is what they did. And then they try to give you pennies on the dollar basically and tell you to survive that way. They want you to be dependent on them. And they create these bureaus, these different agencies that oversee your well-being. Because why? Because back early in the turn of the century, 1800s, 1900s, they say Indians weren't able to take care of themselves. They weren't able to thrive in this world that everybody's changing into. So much so that Native Americans didn't become citizens until 1924. 24. That's when Indians became US citizens. So there's so much oppression that's happened throughout the course of this time that carries on all the way up into where we are now. And we talk about these communities now and in the future. So, you know, the tribes try to create a presence here in Colorado, which is our ancestral homelands. And you run into challenges and roadblocks even with that. We worked on a little bit of the legislation. We keep an eye out from Wyoming to see what's going on here. And you guys have legislation that impacts us, Colorado legislation that impacts the tribes even now. And we have to intervene in certain ways to protect, like what Ben was saying, sovereign rights, the tribe's sovereign rights, the tribe's sovereign abilities to enter into agreements with people. So you have folks that start legislation here on a mascot legislation. And that there's all kinds of different opinions, and everybody can have their opinions about that, right? And you can try to promote legislation that changes that, because if you don't like somebody called the Indians, or you don't like somebody called the Warriors, and you feel that that's offensive to you, we're all individuals. We all have the right to feel that way. What you can't do is you can't overstep by creating a law that tries to step on the laws of one of our tribes. Each of our tribes have the ability to enter into agreements with other government agencies. It's self-determination. It's the governments that we're set up in. And so the legislation could have potentially jeopardized some of the partnerships that we as Northern Arapahos have had with some of the surrounding communities, some that carry our namesake, Arapaho School, Arapaho High School, Arapaho County, and some that have longstanding partnerships with us, such as Strasburg High School. Strasburg High School, to give you a little history of their importance to the tribes in Sand Creek Massacre, they reached out to us after one of their students started researching about Sand Creek. And what it was is, it's part of one of the towns that the soldiers marched down to the Sand Creek Massacre, and they marched back with the body parts. So these people felt compelled to reach out to us to try to create a partnership of healing and goodwill, and we have created a strong partnership with them. So much so that one of our people that our gentlemen that are here, Eugene Ridgely, who spoke earlier this morning, redrew their mascot, redrew it for them, took the cartoonish character and he redrew it for them. And similarly with the Warriors, their mascot was redrawn by another tribal member from back home, and their gym is called Sitting Eagle Gym, which is one of our former tribal leaders, tribal spiritual leaders from home who came down. So we have to watch these different things, and that's how it impacts now. Things impact now, because that potential legislation would have forced those schools to change their names. And there was a law. We have resolutions back home. They're called resolutions. That's how the Arapaho tribe, Northern Arapaho tribe, makes a law. They write a resolution in specific language, and it becomes tribal law, and it's and that's adhered to by all these different tribal and or these different federal agencies that work with the tribes. So we wrote a law that said we have a partnership with Strasburg High School and Arapaho High School, and we have an agreement with them that they can use their names. Recently, we have established a partnership with Arapaho County, who carry our namesake, and we allow them to use the mascot that they have. But they came up and did it in the right way. They came up and asked. They said, "Is this okay? Is this appropriate?" And then the people that are elected into those positions to make those decisions, they said, "Yes, that's fine." And we as the representatives here, Ben, I, and Gail and Eugene, we can speak on their behalf. We can listen and take information, but we take it back to our business council, who ultimately makes all of the decisions. So that's how our communities work now. That's the relevance to Colorado and some of the things that we have to watch out for, because our tribal sovereignty in that regard is all that we have. That's one of the few things that we have left, is the ability to create our own laws and to govern ourselves. And we can't have the state of Colorado, we can't have the state of Wyoming or the state of Montana or even the federal government step on top of that. That would be just another slap in the face of the many things that happened over this time, over all this time. So when we come in from a different perspective, we come in protecting sovereign authority, we protecting our sovereign, our tribes, not us, we're just people, but our tribe's sovereign ability to create these laws and to make these partnerships and to ensure that no other government or legislation oversteps that. So we look at some things differently than maybe your real local indigenous people do, because we got to protect those sovereign abilities, those few things that we have left to hold on to and govern ourselves. Some of the other things that are really important was another piece of legislation that was done here, and that was giving the in-state tuition rate for all of the indigenous students. What a wonderful a law that was passed, a great opportunity for so many kids. For us, we have basically one main four-year college in Wyoming. It opened up 26 other colleges for our students to be able to afford. Now, you got to put that into perspective though, because while the upside of that is so great, the downside of it is that there's no active recruitment. You have to actively recruit these students in order to get them here. And so when I meet with CU Denver, Metro State, CDC, DU, CSU, all of the different colleges that we work with, that's what I remind them. Those are words unless you put some money for it to try to recruit the kids, not only in Wyoming, but in Montana and Oklahoma and wherever the other indigenous students come from. For us, it goes a little bit farther though, because the people here, they have to understand that who you're recruiting, they have a different mind perspective than a non-Indian, a traditional student, because you go back to a short history ago, 20s, 30s, and you hear them talk about these boarding schools. Their children were forcibly removed from parents, taken to these boarding schools. Their hair cut, they're changed to assimilate, like you heard earlier, to be beaten for speaking your language, to essentially trying to force your culture from you, and to make you look upon anybody that practices it as not normal, not right. So that's the mindset of just a few years ago, right? My grandmother went to boarding school, and that's the way that she was treated. That's the things that that we still today deal with that historic trauma. And that trauma isn't that long ago. So when the schools recruit those kids, they have to understand that you're just not coming in and you're not just recruiting a person who's ready to go to school. That person might be ready to go to school, have the academic ability to go to school, the grades, the SAT scores to get into college, and they might even have their funding lined up. But you know who might not want them to go? Their parents. Because they're scared for their well-being, because those kids, like you heard, didn't come home just a few years ago. So you got to recruit those parents just as much as you have to recruit those children. And you know, it's impactful today. It still is the trauma that the tribes at home try to deal with. That historical trauma that people don't even know the word historical trauma, and they work to educate people. And you know, when we have these opportunities to speak, I try to talk specifically to the audience, and you're educating audience. So that's my message to you as educators, is to understand that you're not dealing with the traditional student. You're not dealing with the traditional home life. You're dealing with the traumatic home life. Even the best home lives, you know, they still have trauma. They still fear for their kids. And I'll give you an example of why. Because as I go back and I mention these things, but 100 years ago isn't too long ago. And when your ancestors or your grandparents, your great grandparents are told, if you leave this area, we will kill you. Literally, we will kill you. And a proclamation from that time frame isn't rescinded until 2 years ago. You see how much further we have to go. We've come a long way, but we still have a lot further to go. And those are the things of how we're impacted still by this displacement today. And you can see now how much further we have to go for the future. We still have a lot of work to do. So much so that Aurora City Council doesn't want to introduce a land acknowledgement. Right? You have city administrators who do not want to have a land acknowledgement. You know why? Because it says that this was Cheyenne and Arapaho land. That is the exact reason why one of them said, because she said it's God's country. But it's not. 1851 said that this is Arapaho and Cheyenne country. Pure and simple fact, documented. And she won't acknowledge that. So we still have that far to go. That's the future of educating. You as students have the opportunity to learn this today and educate your peers. You as teachers have the opportunity to recruit our children and give them a better opportunity in their homelands. So, with that, I want to thank you all, thank the panel, and look forward to questions and answers. Thank you, guys.
Hi, I'm one of the I represent one of the families that was displaced on this campus. And I was listening to you and I was thinking about my own experience, but it got totally lost because I do know, I'm fortunate to know the history. It wasn't taught to me in the schools unless I took a particular class when I was in school. Fortunately, my mother had a heart and some knowledge about the indigenous people south of the Arkansas River. So but my question is this. There's so much reparation that has to be done. And I know that. Is there something on the top of your list? Like this morning, somebody asked me, and it's always on the top of my tongue, or, I'm always thinking about the needs. So could you even think of anything? I mean, how? I guess I'm asking how anything could be done to repair what's been done. I really, that's my question. I mean,
No,
I know,
there's, so,
that's why I didn't want to ask.
no,
it.
it's a good question. There's a strategic answer, right? Because it depends on who we're talking to, in my opinion. Who's the audience? What can an institution of higher education do? Right? What they can provide opportunities for our children. You know, that's one thing that that I look for, because it's not something that I need, but it's something that provides that opportunity for our children in the future. And it has to be strong, grounded pathway for children, our children, and their children and future generations to succeed, to have an opportunity, to have something, a chance. There's no chance right now. So with a higher education, or these institutes of higher education, then it's opportunity. If it's the federal government, well, then that's more strategic, and it's something for our higher elected leaderships to look at, along with our lawyers, because those things are owed, as you said. They're not only owed by a feeling of good nature, they're writtenly owed. So it just depends, I guess, who you're talking to, who your audience is, and then you try to tailor it to what they're able to do, without trying to, I don't think any of us want to come with their hand out. We want to come with to present an opportunity for growth for future generations. I think that's the best way that I could answer that question.
Well, I appreciate the question. I think that's a question that has been debated for many years, and certainly throughout the history of federal Indian law and being placed on reservations. There's certain reparations that still need to be addressed. Ancestral homelands is one of them. Take, for example, the Black Hills in South Dakota. The Lakota there have steadfastly refused any money for the illegal taking of that area. And they still maintain that stance. And coincidentally, the Cheyenne also see that as their aboriginal homeland as well. We occupied that area for a long time. But in a contemporary sense, one of the things I think that one of the areas that really is void is to educate the public about the history of Native occupation in this area, and to respect and appreciate the cultural landscape, and seeing the beauty here, and to recognize events such as Sand Creek. And as Ryan has mentioned, to be able to provide those types of scholarships that can benefit the tribes so that that type of initiatives really benefit the tribe as a whole, not just the individual, but the tribe in essence, because it does many things. For one, it engages the students to be part of the institution such as this one. But in addition, it gives the tribe some freedom to leverage some of those financial costs for educating students here, and to partner with other institutions here as well, not just this university, but certainly other institutions, whether they were involved in the past of the history of Native occupation here. In the long run, we've sort of been the group, the indigenous group that has been marginalized and minimized for so long. But as been mentioned by Ben and Ryan, through litigation, we've had to go through litigation to assert our tribal identity and heritage. So it really, when we talk about reparations, there's many different ways to look at it as well, not just financial reparations, but certainly being a part of the history here, whether it's through recognition of certain landscapes, whether it's memorializing these areas. But I think that the thing that we want to do is to be recognized, to be a player, to be a partner, all those things that can make each of us better, to recognize each other. For a lot of you here that are minorities, I think we're all in the same boat as well, that we recognize that it's an uphill challenge. We talked about displacement and gentrification. Oftentimes I've heard the term, we're all one people. And certainly I think it makes the world better when we all work together at making things better. Any other questions?
You know what? I did have another question. If I can, somebody else? Yeah. Okay. So when I've talked to some of my friends, and it hasn't been recently, and we've talked about voting, being part of the electoral process and all that bureaucratic stuff, and I believe, I believe in the power of the vote. But
Can
my
you speak a little loud, put the microphone closer to you?
My
Yeah.
question, I was trying to explain to, how some of my friends, they do not want to vote. They do not want to participate in the electoral, in the system. And I understand that. I understand them from a real emotional point of view. But at the same time, I wonder if you feel, the three of you, or people who do believe in the power of the vote. Voting, being part of, of elections.
Yeah, I
Registering,
think
like
that's
whatever, independent or,
voting is important. I mean, we're such a minority in the voting as a population that I'm not sure we would make that much of an impact. But what I do know, that it's important now that I think there's a ethnic movement to become really involved in voting, and certainly more recently, I think in state and county voting, that we've made a difference. And there's other ways to make an impact when you want to make your voice known. certainly voting is a way. I think we realize that every vote counts, and we're trying to make that successful in Indian country. However, I might also want to say that that's a challenge in Indian country. I know in the past, because we live in rural environments, that the states want to have an address. It used to be that you could just get your mail at the post office, but now you have to have a street address. And on reservations, that's not always the case. So you can't vote unless you have a street address. So we're trying to adapt to those types of challenges. And so that is, I think, something that we're really working on, is that we want to vote. We want to be a voter, participating in elections. But there's always a challenge. There's something that has always prevented us from participating in that sense. When Ryan talked about casinos, and having to, or Ben talking about casinos, and how they had to go to court for it. In Montana, during the 80s, neo-federalism, where a lot of these responsibilities were given to the state. The Northern Cheyenne wanted to have those class 3 types of gaming so that we could have a real good economy, for lack of a better term. The state said, no, you can't. We're not going to allow you to do that. That's when gaming first came out, gaming. So we had to have a gaming compact with the state of Montana, where we could not do class 7 or class 3 gaming. And that really limited our ability to expand and to have some revenue generated coming into the communities. But in addition, it's a rural area, so we really don't have the population as well. And that applied to all the reservations in Montana. They can't have blackjack and all the other popular games that are usually found, Vegas style gaming. So in every step, when we say we'd like to have this so that we can generate tribal revenue, it seems like the feds have a way, or the states, that just want to limit your ability to be able to be self-sustaining and to be independent. When the Eastern tribes that had gaming, where gaming was successful, they became so successful that the state said, wait a minute, we want some of that money. And so they started to develop laws to limit their ability to create that and generate that type of money. So those little those little steps that they do to try to keep us suppressed and marginalized are covert in a sense. And so we know that. But if you go to the state of Montana, it's very overt that you can't have class 3 gaming. They're afraid that we might become successful as some of those Eastern tribes. And so we face challenges everywhere we go. It doesn't matter what direction, if it's about spirituality, if it's about entrepreneurship, if it's about the economy, there seems to always be a challenge. We're the only indigenous population, I think, in the world that has to have a card saying you're native. So you got to have a card in order to have subsidies that shows proof. Yes, I'm Indian. So there's not any other population that I know globally that has that. I know Ben had his hand raised. I'll hand it over to Ben.
I just wanted to mention, even though that we won a case, our gaming case, we just make enough money just to have a little bit economic development for our employees. Because a lot of it's got an effect on the population. I think if we were in Denver or a major city, that's where we would be able to generate monies besides that only for employment, but to better schools or better up the senior citizens, those kind of things. And those are the things there that there's a big difference. The tribes back east are all millionaires because they make so much millions from the metropolis areas. So that's a difference there. We still are able to do just to a certain amount, but like I said, you know, speaking of the governmental side of it too, we're in a rural area, and being in Wyoming, it's a little bit different too. They're more of a frontier state, and they still have that thinking. And we have a challenge back home with a lot of racial problems. We always have to have some device from civil rights or from religious freedom acts for helping us protect our people. Because even though we generate so much money for those communities, make them look good, bringing all that money in for good restaurants, Walmart, whatever, they still follow us around in the store. And that's really hindering to us, because some of those stores, like Walmart, they have a cop in there. Cop walks around like a Gestapo, you know. They shouldn't be doing that. Check your bag, make sure you paid for something, you know. Especially you're being a native, but those are challenges that we face, and those are more and more understandings that we have to try to make the betterment of our future for our young people. So those things are a challenge to us, and I just wanted to mention that to you guys. And on a legislative part, if we can get a representative, they'll have a little more stronger voice in the House or Senate district. So when they enact laws, the state of Wyoming will have a little bit more input. And even though we were talking about tax, what Ryan was talking about, we pay so much severance tax to the state, we don't get nothing back in return. So those are the things that we challenge. There's more and more income that could help us, but somewhere down the line, it's going to depend on the rearrangement of tax basis in the school districts. So those things are oncoming. So, you know, we're doing our best. That's all I can say. And that's for the tribes, you know, we all face those kind of crises. Thank you.
And I'll be real quick because I know there's a question back, but you know, our vote, you know, especially in Wyoming, is limited as a Republican state. But you got to take, you know, from my perspective and my job working for the tribe, it's really important to be cognizant of legislation at the state and national level, and be able to lobby on things that you feel are important, you know. So voting is voting. You're one individual voice, and you should express that if that's how a person feels, or not in your friend's case. But for the tribe and the government, you know, to be cognizant of those legislative opportunities and be aware of those is really important to make the government succeed.
All right, if I can, you guys are free to sit down.
Oh,
And we do have that question, so if you don't mind
oh, yeah.
catching her. So as we get ready to close for the day, I would like to have Gail Ridgely